Greetings. Hello. Happy Sunday. Hope everyone is well today. I hope you are reaching and achieving your highest level of mental and physical, spiritual health, and that you're as well as you can possibly be. And if you're not, you're certainly on the pathway to getting better. We are so glad you're coming to join us today for our 84th consecutive edition of our Ancestors' Voices, a program sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And today we are going to be dissecting chapter 7 of my book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. And we will start with that in just a moment. Just want to, as we always do, to acknowledge the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. We honor them and their struggle for self-determination. And self-determination for them looks like the recovery of all of these lands from Alaska down to Chile, all of the Americas that have been systemically stolen from them over the last 530 years since the invasion of Cristobal Colon, or who they call Christopher Columbus. So we acknowledge their fight to regain their land. That's what they're fighting for. They're not fighting for more casinos and any of that other kind of nonsense. They're fighting for self-determination. And as Malcolm X said, the basis of revolution is land. And so the indigenous people are fighting for their land back. And that has absolutely nothing to do with you if you are not indigenous. If you're not American Indian, Mexicano, Chicano, Puerto Ricano, Latino, however those wonderful folks decide to define themselves, this is their land, you all. And if you don't fit into those categories I just named, you're not indigenous to the Western Hemisphere. We also want to acknowledge always our African ancestors. Our very reason for being here today is because of their great sacrifice for 530 years. And that sacrifice extended from the eastern shores of Africa in the Indian Ocean, all the way across the Atlantic Ocean in West Africa to the Americas. Our people have fought for our dignity over the last 5 centuries and beyond. And so we recognize that these people that engage in these foolish messages, these ignorant messages like, I'm not my ancestors, like you just clearly don't know your African history if you subscribe to a backward message like that. If you have any level of resistance inside of you today and you're African, it's because of your ancestors. That's where you got it from. The problem is that we rely on our enemies to educate us, and no enemy is ever going to educate you properly. So because we rely on them, they have taught us that our existence has always been one of subservience, docility, and passiveness, and that we have never actively stood up to directly confront them in our struggle for justice and liberation. And so we're here to tell you, if you didn't know, we have always stood up and confronted them in our struggle for justice. We have never been a people who collectively turn the other cheek. There certainly are some people who chose that as a tactical approach to achieving our freedom, and we applaud them for that. But to suggest that that's always what we have done, that's a very ignorant and uninformed perspective. So we honor our ancestors, and we are glad that they allowed us to carry on their legacy. And so we're glad you're here too, also, to engage in this discussion today. And so we're going to get it started. First, we do our introductions, as we always do. And we are here to talk about who we are. I'm Ahjamu, organizer in the All African People's Revolutionary Party for many years. And then with me is Shukura, who is also an organizer in the AAPRP and finishing up her doctoral studies so she can use her knowledge, as we always should, to advance humanity. And we're just happy to share this space with her every week, and every other space that we share. We'll soon be able to visit with each other in person, and that'll be a very exciting and fun time, as it always is, but just honored to share this sacred space with her every week. And Our objective in the All-African People's Revolutionary Party is Pan-Africanism, which we define as one unified socialist Africa. One unified socialist Africa. Now, be honest, if you have not participated in the Pan-African struggle, and I don't just mean reading a book about it, although that's great if you've done that, but if you have not participated, engaged in it, then this is a great time to get an opportunity to understand what it actually is and not operate based on something someone else says that it is. It's not any more involved in it than you are. But if you're not, but Pan-Africanism defined, as it says there, is one unified socialist Africa. We believe that that is the objective for the problems that African people face, all 2.5 billion of us scattered in 120 countries around the world today. We believe that until Africa is free, no African anywhere on earth will be free. And we believe that everybody of African descent belongs to the African nation and are the people that we call Africans. And if you want to know more about Pan-Africanism and the work that we do, the book there on the right, written by Kwame Nkrumah in 1968, The Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, lays out the strategy to achieve revolutionary Pan-Africanism, one unified socialist Africa. And that is the work that we engage in the AAPRP. And that work consists of uniting all of the revolutionary Pan-African formations on the ground in Africa into one unified fighting force. And you see some of the logos, not all of them, but some of the logos of the political formations in Africa that we work closely with to achieve that objective. And lastly, in this regard of introductions, we have chapters everywhere on earth. I've been fortunate enough to visit quite a few of them, and hopefully fortunate enough to engage in, visit, and work in quite a few more. And we have relationships with other liberation movements around the world that are fighting against the same unjust conditions that we fight for. So we are just very honored and happy to share this space with you today. Honored that you would find what I humbly wrote in a book worth your time this hour today to find out more about, and glad that you're here to do that. And so to get us started talking about Chapter 7 of A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence, the focus of Chapter 7 is how we connect the work internationally, worldwide. So to get us started with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shukura.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Daddy. I appreciate that. Greetings, everyone. Hoping that you all are as safe mentally, ideologically, physically, spiritually as you can be today. I echo my dad in that we hope that you are finding yourselves in spaces where things are, for the most part, working for you so that you can be the best version of yourself. Not just because you need to be your best version of yourself, but because if you're joining us tonight, then that means you care about other people, which means you care about humanity. So we want you to be the best version of yourself so that you can help us do this work. And that's actually what we're going to talk about in a lot more context tonight as we jump into this first slide. So, the first point is basically helping us understand, if we pull from page 71 of A Guide for Organizing Defense, we're thinking about how we need to make sure that we understand that capitalism is oppressing us in numerous different avenues. Capitalism is oppressing us internally. Okay, how we feel about ourselves internally, our self-esteem is impacted by capitalism. Our perception about ourselves is impacted by capitalism. It's impacting us externally. Okay, and I'm going to give you some examples of that. So not just how you feel about yourself as a person, but also your appearance and how that affects your perception of other people, how you think about other people. Capitalism is impacting you to think about that from an external standpoint. And most important, capitalism is affecting us ideologically, how we think about things and create information, how we take in political education, or our lack of wanting to engage in political education. I always laugh with my dad because when I first moved to Memphis, I met a young man that I thought I could engage in having a, relationship with. And we got into an argument about how Malcolm X was assassinated. And the person's viewpoint was limited because they had not done any, ideological political education around Malcolm, around what was happening. They just, took what so many other people have adopted the narrative to be in terms of the nation having something to do with his death. And when I found the document that argued directly against that ideology, I tried to give it to him and he said, and I quote, I'm not going to read that. And I'll never forget that. And I thought to myself, so even when you have an opportunity to build your brain, which is a muscle, you're refusing to do that. That's so interesting. So we're going to talk about that specifically, how ignorance is dangerous in the next bullet of this slide. But for right now, we have to remember that capitalism is counting on the fact that people do not want to educate themselves. It's counting on that. We're actually doing capitalism's job for it by refusing to engage and building our lives so that we can actually understand what the truth is. Because a lot of what has been taught to us is based off of false mistruths and it's based off of exploitation. And as my dad just eloquently said a few moments ago, if we are truly relying on the same system that oppresses us to teach us about who we are, not just today in 2021, but who we came from, who our ancestors were, what our ancestors did, that is so dangerous. It would literally be the equivalent of trying to make sense out of why something is not working for you when you have not gone about understanding what the proper precautions are that are causing you to be harmed. So, if you're taking your dog to the dog park and then you leave with your dog and you're not understanding why your dog has all these bites and teeth marks on their fur and skin, you have to kind of question what is happening once the dog leaves the gate and goes to play with the other dogs. So I would argue it's the same thing with trusting capitalism to tell you about who you are. That would be no farther from the truth. And why would you trust them to do that when they've already lied to you about everything else? They don't see you as a significant person. They don't see that your life matters. They don't see that you bring anything to the table. I'm not just talking to Africans when I say that. I'm talking to anybody who does not belong to the one percenters. So if you are poor, I'm talking to you. If you are of color, I'm talking to you. If you identify as LGBTQ, I'm talking to you. If you identify as a woman, I'm talking to you. If you identify as differently abled, none of us matter in this system because none of us can promote, protect, and maintain the private corporations for making their money. And that precisely is the definition of capitalism. So because we understand that, we need to also understand that capitalism is constantly working over time to remind us that we are not enough. Capitalism is showing us skin cream commercials because we need to deal with our wrinkles. That's an example of that, how we are not enough and we need to fix our wrinkles because our wrinkles are hideous and no society should have to look at somebody who has skin wrinkles, okay? Capitalism is even entwines itself in the baby aisle. If you are shopping for maternity stuff, if you are postpartum and you've just delivered a baby, capitalism has even inserted itself. There we go. Inserted itself into the baby aisle where I do my community baby shower every year for the organization I'm affiliated with, B-Stars. And we're always going shopping so we can have resources, materials, and actual car seats and strollers to raffle off to our community moms. And so my mentor and I go shopping every year. And it amazes me how there are so many creams for new laboring people who just gave birth to a child to purchase because they need the cream to enhance their milk supply. That's always so interesting to me because if you truly do the political education and you understand that you are enough and your body knows exactly what it needs to do to provide for your infant, then you would know you wouldn't need any cream to enhance something that's already naturally inside of you. Now, are we saying that there's not other implications and that some people have a harder time developing their milk supply? That's not even the argument right now. That's not on the table. What I'm saying is that you shouldn't be communicated to that you can't even be enough for your baby when you haven't even given it a proper chance, because just as you're walking down the aisle, you see this cream reminding you, no, you're not enough. You should have a backup. You should have a backup because you're not enough. And what if you're not enough and then your baby is upset? And of course, you're a new parent, so you want to do what's best for your child. So that's how they communicate to you that you are not significant and that there's something wrong with you. That's how they communicate that. The last example I'll give is the fact that CBD oil is now available at PetSmart. I mean, what the heck? I mean, you can buy CBD oil for your dog to help calm your dog down during a thunderstorm. Now, I have a dog and she does not like thunderstorms. So I understand the benefit of her not feeling anxious, obviously, because I care about her. I don't want her to be distressed. But I'm still making the argument that capitalism benefits from the fact that it is exploiting pet owners who don't want their dogs to be in distress. So it is putting these products in pet stores, knowing you will purchase it because they have communicated to you that you need to do more by spending more money so that your dog can feel safe. I didn't buy her CBD oil, but I did buy her a quote unquote calming spray that I'm supposed to spray on a little vest that I bought her. And evidently it's supposed to help, but that's precisely my point. And they feed off of that because they understand that that's how they continue to manage the private corporate industries. We also have to think about how tactics also include the work for us to be non-existent in terms of how we understand that the government has incorporated itself into ruining trust among organizers. So if you're not sure about that, you can think about how the Black Panther Party was disintegrated because of that, how they took information and started sharing mistruths and lies with Huey when he was locked up, Dr. Newton while he was locked up. And then they did the same thing with Bobby Seale. And then they started playing each other back and forth. They infiltrated the Black Panther Party and had actual FBI members pretend that they were interested in being Panthers so that they could go and collect information and then share memos and share information, share notes. It's happened in other organizations. And we have given examples of how it's currently happening in 2021 and how people are airing laundry in the social media ether when really that stuff needs to be dealt with behind scenes, because that is also feeding into capitalism. When capitalism sees how we react to the fact that it is trying to insert itself and divide us, we need to learn how to deal with that division privately. We can't let the master know how we're dealing with the master exploiting us. That would be like literally having a conversation in front of the slave master about when you're going to escape. I mean, that's not a good tactic. You have to be smarter about how you do that. And so saying all this to say, that's exactly what Pan-Africanism is understanding that even though I may have been born in Sacramento and you may have been born in Cuba, or I may have been born in Canada and you may have been born in Miami, or maybe you were born in a part of London, or maybe you were born in Asia, that still doesn't negate the fact that you belong to the African nation if you are in fact African. And so that's the argument that we have to think about, is that unfortunately Africans everywhere, no matter where they were born, are under attack. That's what Pan-Africanism is it understands that Africans in Ohio are just as oppressed as Africans in the Congo. It understands that. It understands that Africans in Haiti are just as oppressed as Africans who may be living in the Dominican Republic right now. And so we understand that, and we know from Kwame Nkrumah, we know from Marcus Garvey, we know from Malcolm X, all Pan-Africanists, by the way, all of them understood and communicated that this unified connection across the world was more important than life itself, to the point where all of them were either killed or died, literally preaching that as their last moment that they could speak and give conversation for people to document and then later turn that into a book. So, we need to understand that the more connected we are, the more engaged we are, and then we're able to fight and terminate systems of oppression. Now, speaking on the ignorance piece, how did we let fear hold us back? Like, what are the benefits when fear holds us back? There's not many benefits, but how can we actually use fear as a driving mechanism to move us forward? How can we use the same thing that causes us harm and causes us to be uncertain? How can we use that uncertainty to drive us forward? Because I would be willing to bet if we could go back in time and ask our ancestors who were being dragged onto the slave ship if they were scared, I'm sure they would say yes. But I'm sure they also were scared when they punched that slave master in the face and ran left. I'm sure they also were scared when they lit that match or however they created fire back then. Maybe matches were created back then, but however they created fire to set the master's house on fire, I'm sure they were terrified, but they still did what they had to do. Why? Because they understood that those were inhumane conditions and they didn't deserve that. And more importantly, they needed to free themselves and free one another so that it couldn't continue to happen to the ancestors yet to come, the future generations left to come. So at some point, all of us are afraid of something, but the question becomes, are you going to let that fear run you, or are you going to run that fear? Because Assata Shakur was afraid, but Assata Shakur did what she had to do And because of that, I can sit here today and tell you that I benefit from her sacrifices. Her same fear was a sacrifice for me to sit here and be able to look at the world differently and have the world look at me differently because of what she did. I can tell you that Malcolm X was scared, but Malcolm X didn't let his fear drive him because he understood that he was put on this world to make it a better place. And he continued to do that as much as he could because he wanted everyone to know that he understood that Africans deserved a better situation. And he literally writes about that. And Malcolm X speaks. He writes about how he knows that Betty Shabazz understood why he was doing what he did. And he also knew that his children understood why he was doing. None of them regretted the choices that he made, and they knew that he was sacrificing. So how do we let fear be our driving mechanism so that we don't have to face systems of oppression anymore? Ignorance is individualism. That's what ignorance is. It's not up for discussion. If you choose to be ignorant, you are being selfish, because the only alternative would be opening up your mind to have more information so that you can end systems of oppression. By systems of oppression ending, that means more people who are poor or women or LGBTQ or differently abled, that means they're all able to now organize with you so that you can take down other systems like Zionism and xenophobia, so that all systems that do not benefit humanity will be terminated. Why is that a bad thing? But you're going to have to sit down and do some research in order for it to come to that. You're also going to have to do some research because you need to know what the ancestors have done in the past. They have written about this stuff. So we shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel, because unfortunately they were going through similar things. We should turn and look to them and humble ourselves and learn from what they had to say. They had really good information in their books, and some of that stuff has been very viable to make me the person I am today. Even the quotes I just gave to you from Kwame and Malcolm and Marcus Garvey, that's because I've been reading and taking notes and highlighting and documenting things so that I can keep that in my repertoire. And then lastly, for the second bullet, if we are so ignorant that we're not willing to learn and engage in political education, what message are we teaching the youth of tomorrow in terms of why it's okay to be ignorant? So again, try not to be individualistic. Think about other people beyond yourself. And think about the message that you might be displaying for children that you have in the community that watch you, or children that you babysit, or your godchildren, or maybe your own children that you've conceived and had yourself. What message are you sending them if you yourself are not willing to engage? I would argue, if nothing else, it would confuse them, because if they don't see you engaging in political education, then why are you sending them to school every day? That would be my question if I were a child. So we have to think about consistency and commitment to principles. The last point is, it's ironic that we have the nerve to dislike people from other countries because that's Western privilege and that's Western supremacy, but yet we want to use their resources. So if you want to disrespect Africans, okay, that's fine, but then don't use their coltan and their rubber that comes from the Congo and comes from other parts of the continent. Don't use those resources that come from Africa. If you don't like Africa, that means you don't like anything about it. So it's ironic to me that you have no problem using resources that come from other parts of the world, but yet you want to practice xenophobia. That does nothing for anyone. It has no seat at the table, and it needs to be terminated with everything else. And I would argue that we have to continue to think about why it's more important that we work together as opposed to working by ourselves. The last example I'll give you all is, if you know anything about geese, you know that when they fly south for the winter, they have a strategic way that they go about flying. You can change to the next slide, Daddy. They have a strategic way that they go about flying. So that means they are clear that the head of the V, because they fly in a V, if you know anything about geese, when that point of the V gets tired, that bird falls back and another bird completely substitutes and continues on with the rotation. The two back flyers at the end points of both of the V, they are monitoring the air wind and the pressure and all this stuff. And they all honk loudly to understand that this is what we need to be doing. Maybe we need to take a break. Maybe we need to slow down. They have a tight, unified force on how they do that. So if geese can do it, why can't humans? And I'm not saying that we're better than geese, because it's not a specious thing right now. That's not what this is. I'm saying we should learn from them, because obviously what they're doing is working. If it's not broke, right? Don't fix it. Okay. So for the first point of this slide, I need us to remember from page 72 that we have to walk through these tactics and methods to connect with other organizations. We should not be trying to organize by ourselves in our one little organization or in our two little organizations. However many organizations you yourself belong to, that is wonderful. We need that. And I'm glad that you're involved with different organizations, but you should not think, or your organization should not think, that you should be organizing and ending all systems of oppression by yourself. That is still elitist in its own way. And it doesn't help the masses of people, because the whole purpose is for different organizations to connect. Because when we each one teach one, we grow and expand, and our capacity is remarkable to the point where it cannot be stopped. So we have to think about why we shouldn't want to do it alone, and why that attitude of intentionally trying to end systems of oppression with just being a part of the AAPRP, or just being a part of the Black Alliance for Peace, or just being a part of Liberation Road, that's not a good ideology to have if you have that ideology, because that stops the struggle from happening and continues to perpetuate individualism. Even as an organization is practicing that, it's still individualism, because we need as many organizations as possible to help us with this fight. And we want to make sure that we do it collectively, because we can learn from other organizations. We can exchange resources. We can build capacity. This also means that we can understand that, we need to deny capitalism on all fronts, which means if as many organizations as possible can deny and refuse capitalism, that means capitalism doesn't stand a chance to exist. If we can deny and refuse imperialism, that means imperialism does not stand a chance to exist. If every single entity is pushing against that system, it will crumble, because it needs people to adopt the system to promote it. So if we all refuse to adopt it, then what is it going to do? It's going to have to disintegrate, because it has no choice. It can't exist off of that. The next point is talking about how on page 71, we have to speak to how we need to expand our circles. And so this talks more about, we're thinking about our networks and how our organizations are connecting with one another. And I spoke a little bit about this, but this will allow us to connect. This allows us to build knowledge, the page talks about. The page also says, and we're building a larger amount of people who are doing the work. So even though when we say to start an organization, we're encouraging you not to worry about having 7,000 people to start. You don't need 7,000 people. We talked about that. You just need a few willing bodies who are willing to address an issue and work collectively on ways to strategize around organizing to deal with that. But as the organization grows, you want to get more people, of course. Why? Because this is how you prevent burnout. This work is serious, y'all. This work is intense. This work is laborious. This work is serious, okay? And I am as humbled as I can be, but I know that I am tired for a reason, mentally, ideologically, and physically, okay? So if we think about how it prevents burnout, just like the geese example I just gave, when one of us who's been organizing, my dad, for example, for close to 4 decades, starts to maybe get a little tired. I know he won't get tired, but I'm just using him hypothetically as an example. When he starts to get tired, he can already pass the baton to me, because I humbly have 25 years behind him to still play catch up and can still continue to give my 25 years to this work. And then when I need to humbly sit down and take my break, I hope to pass the baton to someone. And it should be that same rotation, just like the geese. When one of us gets tired at the head of the V, we can fall back and somebody else can step in, because we've built capacity at this point. So we have different people who can step up, and they all have that foundation of political education. So they're good. They're ready to go. We need to think about how that's how you manifest and build collectivism, when you practice that, when you connect different organizations that are all responsible for making sure that all these organizations can end and terminate systems of oppression. That's how you manifest that. And then you also want to think about, for the last point, we have to think about how we need to think we are responsible for resisting capitalism. Every single moment of your day, you should be thinking about, how do I resist capitalism? And I know that that's really hard, because that means you have to be conscientious first of the fact that you need to resist a system that you were born into. So you may not understand how to go about doing that. But I can give you some examples that I think would be very helpful, because we've already seen it happen in our timeline, especially if you are alive right now listening to this broadcast. We've seen different examples of how that looks, and we have to continue to manifest those examples. We have to multiply those examples by the thousands and by the millions. As I said, if we all are resisting the same system, it cannot exist. but 5 of us can't resist it. 500 of us can't resist it. It needs to be the whole wide world. Anybody who identifies as being oppressed should be resisting capitalism. And if we all can resist it from an oppressed standpoint, then we won't be oppressed any longer. So the first example I can give is we want to push against capitalism to help the masses see their capability. Because when they do that, that's how they build resistance, but that's also how they create new norms where we understand that the new environment is human-centered and human-driven and not financially driven. So, if we think about the Black Panther Party, right? Like they incorporated community health clinics before women, infant, and children, and before these other clinics came about, okay? The reason I'm bringing up the Black Panther Party is because these clinics were created because they knew that women identifying people were having issues, prenatal and maternal and child health, but also, pre screenings, cancer screenings for breast cancer, cancer screenings for cervical cancer, things like that. So this community health clinic existed, to help isolate health issues. Accessibility was no longer an issue because African women could clearly go to these clinics and get the help, the treatment, and the respect that they deserved by the doctors instead of being perceived as lazy or racist or whatever is happening nowadays. So African women felt safe and comfortable going to these clinics. And then they also were encouraged to do preventative care screenings because that's how they were able to see, oh, okay, we see something that looks abnormal. How often are you doing your breast exams? Or how often are you doing this? How often are you doing that? Are you taking your prenatal vitamins? Do you have any questions? How do you plan to feed your baby? Are you interested in trying the human milk approach? All these different things. So, the more preventative care they were able to do on the early front, the less financially costworthy it would be later. So that would be an example of pushing against capitalism and resisting capitalism. Because the more money that you can, the more sicker you are, the more money the system will make. So by them having preventative care opportunities where women didn't have to pay to be serviced, because we know that people should not have to pay to get health care, then we understand that that's how they save money. That's how the insurance company loses out. That's how the medical system loses out. And that's how capitalism loses out. When we find a way ourselves to help one another where we don't have to worry about funding a system that doesn't value us. The last example I'll give, and I'll pass it back over to my dad, is that in my workplace, because I'm encouraging you all to adopt as many socialist values in your residence, in your work, and in your lifestyles as possible. If you identify as a socialist and if you're involved with a socialist organization, then you should be incorporating socialist values as much as possible because that's your norm, right? That's what you believe in. So I am incorporating socialist values in my workplace, and I work with other people who are incorporating that. We have a shared office space that some of the graduate students share, and we needed a microwave. And so what we did was we met up and we said, okay, we're going to go to the department and see if they can help fund us to get a new one, because we had one, but it broke down and wouldn't work anymore. And so we talked to the department people and they said, oh, sorry, we don't have any money in the budget for that. And we noticed that as soon as they told us no, we saw that they had just got a new microwave in their office upstairs, which is very interesting, but that's okay. That's fine. And so we went back to the drawing board and we said, well, let's just take up a donation and let's all put in some money to get this microwave. And that's exactly what we did. And we needed something else. Oh, we needed paper. We needed paper for the printer. Same thing. We went up there and they gave us 2 sheets. If you have ever gone to college, then 2 sheets of paper is not enough, okay? Especially for graduate students, but we're not even gonna talk about that because I need to pass it back over to my dad. My point is now we have a paper donation system that we collectively have organized ourselves where we're not relying on the department to give us 2 sheets when the average article is 10 pages, clearly. We're relying on ourselves because we need to be self-sufficient and we need to show collectivism and support one another. And so those are just examples that I have shown to be beneficial in the workplace. I would encourage you all to continue adopting those because any moment that you can resist capitalism is a step in the right direction. Join an organization working for justice, and Asante Sana.
Thank you very much, Shukura. And we will just continue on. Sorry, had some technical issues going on here, but we will just continue on talking about this chapter 7 of the book. How do we connect the work internationally? And apologize for the typo there, but you made some good points in terms of talking about how xenophobia does nothing to benefit us. And it's a tool of the system of exploitation to keep us divided, keep us just focused on our individual realities and not realizing the power we get by coming together and working together. So we're just going to continue to try to build on that by talking about some of the key points I wanted to make in that chapter when I put it together. And that's that xenophobia, which is defined as a fear and opposition to people who are different than you. Okay, as a simple definition for it, is the role of capitalism in exploitative system is to make xenophobia dominant in the society. So the way they do that, as Shukura talked about, is by promoting ignorance. So here we are, if you talk about the United Snakes of America, for example, here we are in this country. This is a country where you have at least 50 million African people that live here. You have at least, I would say, 70 million indigenous people. And I already defined what I mean by indigenous. So, if people are confused by that, then you just got to do the work you got to do to understand it better. But I would say this empire is built primarily off of the exploitation of those two communities. In other words, however you're sitting in this society today, I don't care who you are or what you do, a lot of that has to do with what has happened over the last 500 plus years to those two communities of people. And in spite of all that, which is completely irrefutable, most everybody, 95% of the people in this country know nothing about African history, including African people, know nothing about the Americas before 1492, including a lot of the indigenous people, know nothing about that. And that's not an accident. That's without question by design. And the purpose of that is, there are a lot of reasons. The primary reasons are, if you don't know anything about a people, then it's impossible for them to be humanized in your mind. So then whatever happens to them, you're not going to put up much of a fuss about that, number one. And then number two, if you don't know anything about them, then when they come with all their reactionary propaganda about who these people are, then you're going to believe it because you don't have any concrete knowledge to confront the lies that they're telling. So they make xenophobia dominant that way. And so this is why, if you don't believe that, well, that's not true. Well, then how else would you explain like this phenomenon, this anti-immigration phenomenon here? That's the only explanation for that, is because they fill people with fear. That's the whole point of the tactic, that, oh, these rapists, these murderers are going to come over here and take over this country. Oh, these thugs in the inner city are going to take over the country. That's the whole point of those talking points, is to advance the notion of fear, which is based on ignorance. So xenophobia has to be the dominant thinking in order for this system to work. Next, capitalism relies over time to ensure that any problem that exists in this society, it can happen for any number of reasons, but it's never happening because of this capitalist profit over people system. That's the dominant propaganda promoted in this society. So because that's so dominant, this is the reason that nobody here, except for the few of us who are revolutionaries, ever offers a solution to the problems that don't fall within the context of the capitalist system. Everything else that's being offered is only ever within the context of the capitalist system. Well, the problem is that we have to vote somebody in that's going to solve the problems. That's what we have to do. Every election, they say the same damn thing. This is the very important election. They're all very important. They're all going to solve the problem. And the problem keeps getting worse. So clearly, for thinking people, at some point you have to say, we got to step back a bit and then step back forward and put everything on the table. We can't just keep taking the same approach, that the only context we can talk about the solution for these problems is only within the context of this political and economic system that created and sustains itself off of perpetuating the problems in the first place. Okay, so that's their strategy. So if you want to see a better world, we've got to think beyond the strategy of the people who are benefiting from the way things are today. That's essential. And then revolutionary international consciousness, or having a consciousness of what's going on in the world, which is what this chapter, is talking about, it does so much more than anything else to help us connect in the world. This reality we have now completely isolates you from the rest of the world. And it makes you think that what's happening with you, you're the only person that's happening with. And as long as you believe that, and what I mean by that is police terrorism, for example. Well, if Africans in this society or indigenous people think, their communities are the only communities that suffer from police terrorism, then that strengthens the state and how it's perpetuating police terrorism, because these folks will never be able to connect the dots under that kind of thinking and see that, no, this is a systemic problem designed to perpetuate this system. It's not just something aimed against us. And because we don't understand that, that's why you get all these dysfunctional responses to it. Like, well, the police terrorism exists because they don't like us because we're Black. Like that's what a lot of people think, right? Like, whether they like us or not, it would still be happening to us. And the reason why is because it's essential to maintain this political economic system of capitalism. But if all you see is just, what happens in the neighborhood you live in, you'll never be able to understand that. But once you understand, well, this happens not only to people that look like me here, but people that look like me everywhere on earth. It happens to other people. It happens all over the globe. It happens on all the continents. Then now you can come to see, well, this is a systemic problem. This is bigger than just me getting pulled over by the police, or somebody I know getting shot, or somebody I saw on TV getting shot in the inner city in the US. This is obviously much bigger than that. You can come to understand that. And this is exactly what they don't want to allow to happen. So a big element of how they're able to effectively keep us from seeing the whole world we live with and live in is continually perpetuating capitalism's main and most dominant message, that of rampant individualism. That's what they have to ensure happens, because what individualism does is prevents us from developing a broader analysis of anything beyond the end of our nose. That's what it does. So as long as we have a primarily individualist perspective, then we're always going to only be able to analyze things based on anecdotal information, examples. Like, well, the reason why I don't think that police terrorism is a thing is because I knew Darnell when I was working in the inner city, and Darnell used to sell drugs. So that's why Darnell got pulled over and got arrested. Okay, that's Darnell. If you have data, you know that it's not about saying Darnell shouldn't have been pulled over. It's about saying Darnell getting pulled over is gonna get arrested. 5 times more likely that's gonna happen. Is gonna get convicted. Is gonna serve a longer prison sentence than Trevor, who also had drugs in his car and got pulled over. That's what we're talking about. But if you only see it from that individualistic perspective, you don't understand how to have that higher analysis. Or as one of my young white European comrades said, I grew up in the suburbs. This is what he said. I grew up in the suburbs. I'm telling you, there are as many guns and drugs in the suburbs as there are in the inner city. The only difference is that the police are not checking for them out there. And that's exactly right. But if you don't have that collective analysis, you'll never get to that point. You'll never see that. So they strive on creating this oppression Olympics between us because we have this dominantly individualistic perspective. So I see it all the time. People talk about, well, the police are shooting Black people, quote unquote. I say quote unquote because I don't use the term Black, as you should know by now. But that's what they say. Police are shooting Black people like that's the only thing that's happening. Or even some of us are even more micro than that. Police are killing Black men, quote unquote. Like that's the only thing that happens. Like they're not shooting African trans women. They're not shooting indigenous people. They're not even shooting poor white people, which all of that is happening. In fact, when you have a broader analysis, you're not looking at it like, well, I want to compete. I want to be the most oppressed. And I want people to acknowledge that. You develop a much more developed understanding of what's actually happening here. And that is that anyone who stands up against this system the system is going to move against those people. Those two Europeans were killed in Kenosha, Wisconsin by that 17, or I guess he's 18 now, I don't know what he is, that terrorist with the AR-15. And those two people are not getting any justice. They're talking about there's a good chance that terrorist is going to be acquitted. And those are white people he killed. So, I have all these discussions with my African folks, and they're like, we don't have any allies. I'm like, there's all kind of allies. You just don't know our history. We've always had allies, and we always will. And we will always be allies to other people. But you don't know our history, so you don't know that. All you know is just your individual experience, and that's it. And that's nothing. Sorry. I mean, that doesn't take us anywhere, because if I don't know what you've done. You might not have done anything. So I can't rely on your individual experience. I have to rely on the collective experience. The only way I'm going to understand that is through studying it and participating in it. Those two things. So this oppression Olympics is a tactic that's based on individualism, and it's designed to keep us forever confused about what's actually happening. Okay? And then any person that has a healthy impression of themselves is automatically going to develop a healthy impression of other people. I always know when someone has done no study of our history as African people, because those are the people who say things like, we don't have any allies, we're in this by ourselves, you can't trust people. Well, they don't know anything. So they're influenced by this reactionary, xenophobic ideology that has been imposed upon them by the very same people that they will swear up and down that they oppose. And that's the dynamic that happens. Whereas in the All African People's Revolutionary Party, for example, we have a very well-developed work study political education process. And so because of that, we study intensely. And I've been involved in that process for going on 40 years now. It's done way more for me than I went through the bourgeois education system and I'm a slave with a master's degree. And I'm telling you, the APRP work study process did more for my education of who I am and what I am in the world than 5 or 6 master's degrees would do. And so because I participated in that independent revolutionary study process and still continue to participate in it, then what I've learned is so much about who I am as an African, what that means to be an African. What are the contributions of the Igbo people, the Yoruba, the Wolof, the Mandinka, the Fulani, the Akan, the Kikuyu, the Tigrinya, I know, the Shona, the Lingala, I know the contributions of my people. So you can't tell me anything about who I am as an African in a negative sense. You will not be, and people realize they don't even try to do that with me anymore. And because I have such pride in who I am as a human being, I will never fall for their okie doke where you're an African American. No, I'm not. I'm not anything American. I'm an African fighting for our humanity in America. That's it, period. And they can't touch me with that. And because I have that, and it's strong, and it's reinforced, and it's solidified, then I naturally, because I respect myself and who I am, I naturally respect other people. And so we propel ourselves. I wanted to know everything I could learn about the Palestinian struggle, because I understand oppression, because we've experienced it for 530 years. So I want to know everything I can about the Palestinian struggle. I want to know everything I can about the struggle of the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. I want to know everything that I can about the Irish people's struggle. So you come to my house, you see pictures of James Connolly, the Irish Marxist leader of the Irish Republican Socialist movement, because I consider James Connolly a white man. I consider him one of my ideological fathers. I'm looking at a picture in my bedroom right now, a huge portrait of Sister Anna Mae Picton Aquash, the Mi'kmaq woman of the American Indian movement. That is my auntie. I don't know her. She was dead when I was a little child, but her spirit lives through me. And I have to be encouraged to learn about her sacrifice, and that inspires me. And that's what you get when you broaden your horizons. You're not like, well, any woman ain't got nothing to do with me. What an ignorant perspective. That's the perspective of your enemy invading your consciousness. That's what we have to do. The people in the Filipino National Liberation Movement inspire me to be the best person I can be. So when you know who you are, then the next logical thing is you're going to connect with other people. And that means you're breaking down these artificial barriers. But if you look at yourself right now and you don't know anything about Africa, you don't know anything about Asia, you don't know anything about the Americas before 1492, well, then they got you exactly where they want you to be. And it doesn't matter that you're a good person, that's irrelevant. You don't have any information, you can't move. So that's the first thing that has to be corrected. It's essential. And we just benefit zero by having this kind of micro-nationalist approach. That's what we call it. We're like, all I care about is Black people. That's micro-nationalism, meaning small nationalism. That's what that means. And that benefits our enemies because it prevents us from having an analysis and a perspective that will broaden our understanding enough so that we can understand that the problems we face are the same everywhere. And if we link up, that's where our power is. By doing that, it makes sense to do that. So that's what we have to challenge to do. That's what this chapter of the book is really wanting to bring home, that we have to learn how to eliminate these artificial barriers that have been placed in front of us. Now, I understand, like women, for example, who are oppressed by patriarchy in this system. A lot of times the result of that is women don't want anything to do with men. I totally get that. I'm not personally offended by that. I understand that. If I was them, I probably feel the same way. In fact, when I was a young man, I did, because a lot of Africans react to say, oh, anything to do with Europeans, nothing at all. And I get that, I understand. And if you're European and your response to that is, well, I didn't do anything, you're part of the problem. It has nothing to do with you. And if you really want justice, you have to grow to the point where you're large enough to understand that. Any European who doesn't understand an African that's like, I don't want anything to do with white people, then you're not our friend. You're perpetuating the values of this system. It's got to be bigger than that. I've said this a number of times. I do security all the time. I've done it countless times for like women's marches, LGBTQ marches. I'm not a woman, I'm not LGBTQ. I do it because I have an undying thirst for justice. And I understand that as Dr. Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. As long as those communities are marginalized, I'll never be safe, no matter what African people do. So I will continue to do that, even though I realize a lot of people don't get it. I mean, that's their problem, but my point is that when I'm in those spaces, I hear all kind of anti-men talk when I'm there. And I don't, I hear, like the last time I did it, the women right behind me were like, men are dogs, men are shit, I hate men. And they were giving all these examples based on their experiences. And when they did that, I was like, yeah, I agree with that. Like, if I don't have that kind of political maturity, I shouldn't be there in the first place. And so here are the techniques the book talks about how we connect the work internationally. So, everybody's on social media, so use it to reach out to people. You have to have that. I think that if we don't understand like how to use the enemy's platforms to serve the masses of people, then we're missing a wonderful opportunity. Reach out to people. You don't have to know them. I'm a revolutionary organizer. Most of the people I reach out to, I don't know them. If they don't want to talk to me, my self-esteem is not that fragile. Like I'll go to the next person. But get in the habit of reaching out to people, introducing yourself, talking about the work you're doing, and trying to figure out how you can collaborate. That's a lot of the work we do in AAPRP. So that's essential. And now that we have all these channels, in the 60s, you had the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, you had CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, you had the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, you had the Urban League. All of these organizations worked in one organization called COFO, the the Congress of Federated Organizations. That's why when the 3 civil rights workers were killed in 1964, two of them were core members and one was a SNCC member, because they worked together, and they had no internet, they had no laptops, they had no cell phones, and they were able to link up organizationally across the country and do that. And now today we got all this technology, and you can't even get 5 people together for a barbecue. This is what we have to deal with, you all. We got to figure out how to be better and link up better and stop thinking that it's a positive to be isolated from one another. If you isolated, you're not talking to anybody, and you talk about you stand for justice, you're fooling yourself. So reach out to people doing the work. Introduce yourself. Start to build with them. Just take that as your opportunity. Stop waiting for somebody to come and get you or somebody to tell you what to do. You don't need anybody to tell you what to do. Look at it like you look at when you get hungry. Just go do it. That's what you're supposed to do, because it should be just as natural, if not more, than eating food when you're hungry. So do that. And then figure out ways that you can mutually support. Understand, and I'm saying this, I've been doing this for years, you all. When you go to people, that means, I've said this before, I spend 95% of my time around people I don't agree with, because I'm trying to build capacity. So that means I go to these meetings and they're talking about doing something. I don't want to do it. I don't agree with it. They're talking about going to City Hall to protest police terrorism. I don't want to go to no City Hall. I have zero faith in City Hall, in the state capitol, in the White House. I want to see those buildings burn one day. I don't have any faith in any of that nonsense, but that's where they're at. So instead of me being in a meeting like a lot of you all would do and say, well, y'all wasting your time doing that. Oh, why are you doing that? I volunteer in a meeting like, hey, you want to have a rally at the state capitol or City Hall? I got a sound system. I'll bring it out there. I'll run it for you. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to spend $1,000 to rent one. Now, once I do that, which I've done dozens of times, you think that those people are going to have a problem with me coming in the meeting the next time? And then when I start to say, well, maybe you might want to think about this instead of that, you think they're going to have a problem with that? I can tell you from experience, the answer is no. That's how you build relationships, because when you do that kind of stuff, people begin to trust and respect you. And when people begin to trust and respect you, they're going to listen to what you have to say. So that's how you organize, you all. That's how you do it. Okay, so that's what we're talking about in this chapter, is that's how we build together and build relationships. And then recognize that this element of your work does nothing but strengthen you. I certainly speak from experience for that. And it strengthens your commitment to the work. That's what it does. So in other words, the more you connect with other people who are doing good work, the stronger it's going to make you, even if you're not where they are when they're doing the work they're doing, because you're all doing work that's designed to contribute towards the same thing. And so before we close out, I just wanted to say a couple of things. We had some very good comments here on Facebook from my good comrade friend Shan Shan, talking about the frustrating nature of doing electoral work and wanting to move to another level. That's a real positive thing. I mean, I don't know how y'all do it. I don't know how you go all those meetings and yell at those people and nothing changes, and then they have another meeting and you yell at those people. I peeped that out when I was 24 years old. We had a militant demonstration here in Sacramento at the state capitol, and they sent 3 or 4 legislators out there, and they listened, and people vented, and people felt better. And that's the whole purpose of that. But I noticed nobody had a pen and paper. Nobody was writing down anything. And so I knew from that they had no intentions of following up and doing anything. And that was 40 years ago. And the problems that we were out there, that people were venting about 40 years ago, they're worse today. So this is why I'm the way I am. You know, why is he like that? This is why I'm like that, because I paid attention all this time. When you've been, I don't know where your head has been, but you keep keep going to the meetings, and that's all you got. Like, you can do that, but you should have something else that's you're controlling, that's supporting that. And so we just want to say that's what the chapter talks about. And next week, come back. We're going to go over the last chapter of the book. We're going to be done reviewing the book. And the last chapter is entitled The Summary of the Book. So join us for our Ancestors' Voices next Sunday, where we go through the close of a guide for organizing defense against white supremacist, patriarchal, and fascist violence. And then the following week, we're going to go back to another general topic in the world for justice, which we'll announce next week. And go to aprp-intl.org if you want to sign up. We encourage you to do that. A lot of people are doing that. Thank you. We want to build this party. That's what all of this is about for us, because we think that's the solution. ABetterWorld.me is my site. You can go there. I just wrote and posted an article today about Colin Kaepernick's miniseries on Netflix. So I encourage you to watch his show on Netflix, and then I encourage you to read my analysis of it. I think they're both good. I think you should check it out. You should do it all. And I'm an editor with the Hood Communist Collective, hoodcommunist.org. Read that every Thursday. Support revolutionary African voices. Our Telegram event is coming up this Thursday. We'll have a topic. You can download Telegram on your Playphone app store and participate. You can participate in that discussion. All right. And then we have all those broadcasts on the bottom that are sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. So we invite you to participate in them. Pantula, the Revolutionary African Women, Raw, Forward Ever, through Spotify, and the comrades in New Mexico do the APRP news broadcast every Thursday at 12 noon Mountain Time. So participate in that. Continue to buy my book. People, I can't believe it. People are still buying it. And I want to encourage us to do work around that. I want to do more work. So a guide for organizing defense against white supremacist, patriarchal, and fascist violence. Let's get it going. Let's build capacity to fight against this system. We appreciate you all. We thank you for joining us for this hour. We want to have a world for future generations where they are not dealing with all of the trauma that Brother Kaepernick's series did an excellent job of showing how he had to deal with racist microaggressions growing up. Did a very good job of demonstrating that. And we want to create a society where our youth don't have to do that, where women don't have to do that, where LGBTQ people don't have to do that, where colonized people don't have to deal with that. And so we will only do that when we organize and create it. So thank you for joining us. We know that white supremacy is evil, it's got to go. We know patriarchy is evil, it's got to go. Homophobia is evil, it's got to go. Capitalism is the father of all of those systems. It's evil, it's got to go. You already know. Forward ever, backwards never. One unified socialist Africa. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening.